The evening air was heavy with the smell of gasoline and fried food drifting from the corner store. A flickering streetlight buzzed above the cracked pavement, its glow bending across a row of parked cars that had seen better years. The city was alive in its usual way. Distant horns, the murmur of voices, the hiss of a bus braking at the light. It was a neighborhood that wore its fatigue openly. Graffiti on the walls, paper cups rolling in the gutter, and eyes that watched from behind half-drawn curtains. Down the sidewalk came an old man in a worn army jacket. The fabric was faded to a dull green gray, the kind that had seen more sun, sweat, and rain than most men could handle. His hair was silver, cropped close to the scalp, and his gait was uneven, a slight limp, the mark of an old injury that never quite healed. In one hand he held a brown paper bag, tucked close to his chest as if it contained something precious. The other hand rested in his jacket pocket, fingers brushing the edge of a tarnished dog tag he still carried after all these years. His name was Harold Tate, though no one on this block knew that. Around here, he was just the old vet. People nodded when they passed him, some out of respect, some because they'd heard stories about how he'd once stopped a mugging with nothing but a cane and a cold stare. But most nights, Harold was left alone, which was exactly how he liked it. Tonight, however, the quiet was about to be broken. 3 figures leaned against the brick wall beside the store, their laughter rough and mean. Young, late teens, maybe early 20s, with the swagger that comes from mistaking recklessness for confidence. Hoodies up, sneakers bright, hands in pockets. They'd spent the last hour smoking cheap weed, passing a bottle, and talking big about easy scores. When they saw Harold limping down the street, alone, carrying that little brown bag, the opportunity seemed too simple to pass up. "Yo, check him out," one of them whispered, a skinny kid with a scar cutting across his eyebrow. "Old dude's got cash for sure." "Nah, man," said another, heavier, with gold caps flashing when he grinned. "He just got groceries or something. Not worth it." The third one, taller than the rest, eyes sharp with restless energy, nudged him. "Groceries mean money. Money's money. Come on, it's just an old man." That was all it took. The 3 pushed off the wall and fanned out, moving with the sloppy confidence of amateurs who thought the night belonged to them. Harold saw them before they even spoke. He'd seen their kind in 100 faces before, in alleys, in jungles, in cities halfway across the world. The body language was the same. The bounce in the shoulders, the scanning eyes, the hungry grin. Trouble, dressed young. He didn't change pace, didn't speed up or slow down. Just kept walking. "Hey, old timer." The tall one stepped forward, blocking the sidewalk. "Where you off to in such a hurry?" Harold lifted his eyes, steady and calm. "Home. Home, huh?" The boy smirked. "What's in the bag, old man?" "Dinner. Or maybe something worth sharing." The second thug laughed. "Yeah, share with the neighborhood, Gramps." The third, the one with the scar, circled behind Harold, trying to look intimidating but mostly just twitchy. Harold stopped walking, the sound of his shoes against concrete falling quiet. He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze slow, deliberate, the kind of look that made a man feel like he'd just been measured and found wanting. "Boys," he said softly, "you sure you want to do this?" That only made them laugh harder. "Man, listen to him," the tall one said. "He think he's in some kinda movie." But there was something in the old man's voice, something low and solid, like the rumble before thunder, that unsettled them just a little. Not enough to stop, not yet, but enough for hesitation to creep in, invisible but present. Harold sighed. He set the paper bag down carefully beside his foot. The movement was slow, respectful, almost ritualistic. When he straightened, his hand brushed his jacket again, feeling the familiar weight of the tag beneath the fabric. The tall one cracked his knuckles. "You gonna give it up, or what?" Harold looked at him, eyes narrowing just a fraction. In the dim light, they didn't look like an old man's eyes. They were sharp, clear, and cold, eyes that had seen through jungle smoke and the red haze of combat. He didn't raise his voice, didn't posture or plead. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said quietly. The boys glanced at each other, confused, a little irritated. They'd expected fear, excuses, maybe a trembling plea. Instead, they got stillness. "Guess we'll find out," the tall one sneered, stepping closer. And for the first time in years, Harold felt that old calm wash over him, the one that came before the fight. He had no weapon, no backup, no plan. He didn't need one. The streetlight flickered again, and in that pulse of shadow and light, something in his stance shifted. The limp vanished. The old soldier was awake. The tall one was the first to move. He lunged, clumsy and confident, swinging a fist meant to make the old man crumble. But Harold didn't flinch, didn't even blink. His left hand shot up with the speed of muscle memory, the kind born from years of instinct, not thought. He caught the boy's wrist mid-swing, twisted sharply, and a crack echoed down the empty street. The thug's laughter turned to a high, strangled cry as his knees buckled, crashing onto the pavement. "Son," Harold muttered, voice even, "that's not how you throw a punch." The second one, heavier, breathing hard from shock more than effort, cursed and charged. Harold pivoted, sidestepping just enough to let momentum do the work. The kid's shoulder met the veteran's elbow, and he went tumbling into the wall with a dull thud. A bottle fell from his pocket and rolled away, leaking cheap liquor across the concrete. For a moment, time slowed. The third thug, the one with the scar, froze halfway between action and retreat. His brain hadn't caught up with what his eyes were telling him. An old man had just dismantled his friends in seconds. Harold straightened, his breathing calm, shoulders relaxed. The limp was gone now. His stance was balanced, weight perfectly distributed, not the posture of a man afraid, but of one utterly in control. "You boys ever been in a real fight?" he asked, not mockingly, but with a strange kind of curiosity. The scarred one swallowed, his bravado draining fast. You some kinda cop or something?" Harold shook his head slowly. "Worse." The heavy one groaned on the ground, clutching his shoulder. The tall one swore under his breath, nursing his wrist. The streetlight above flickered again, casting long, jagged shadows across the brick wall behind them. It looked almost like a scene out of an old war film. 3 men down, one still standing, silent and unmoved. "I ain't scared of you." The tall one spat, his pride clawing for a foothold. He stumbled to his feet, grabbing a small folding knife from his pocket. The metal blade flashed weakly in the yellow light. "You think just 'cause you old, I won't." Before he could finish, Harold stepped forward once, then twice, fast enough that the kid's eyes widened in surprise. The veteran's hand clamped onto the knife wrist, twisting again, not with brute force, but precision. The blade clattered to the ground, useless. In one motion, Harold swept his leg, sending the boy sprawling once more. The knife skidded across the pavement and came to rest near the gutter. "Don't bring a toy to a man's fight," Harold said, his tone low but not cruel. The scarred one backed up a step, palms raised now. "Hey, man, we didn't mean nothing. Just messin' around, you know." Harold's gaze softened just a little. Beneath the hard lines of his face, there was something else, a flicker of disappointment, maybe even sorrow. "Messin' around," he repeated, almost to himself. "You ever mess around in a jungle at midnight, hearing men scream for help you can't give? You ever see a friend disappear in front of you and realize you still have to keep moving?" They didn't answer. They didn't understand. How could they? He sighed. "No, I don't suppose you have." The sound of distant sirens drifted from a few blocks away, faint but enough to make the boys fidget. Harold looked at them one by one, and the calm in his expression only made them more uneasy. "In '68, he said quietly, "I fought men who didn't miss twice. Men who thought a gun made them gods. But they bled like everyone else. You kids, you think the world owes you something. Let me tell you, it doesn't." He bent down, picked up the knife, and flipped it open. The blade caught the light again, silver and sharp. Then he folded it closed and handed it back, handle first, to the tall one, who hesitated before taking it with a trembling hand. "Go home," Harold said simply. "Before you find someone less patient." The three exchanged glances, fear, anger, and a trace of shame flickering across their faces. The heavy one muttered something under his breath, but none of them stayed to test their luck. They stumbled away down the street, muttering curses that didn't carry conviction. Harold watched them go until their shadows vanished around the corner. For a long moment, the street was silent again except for the faint hum of a neon sign and the whisper of the night breeze. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind the familiar ache in his knee and the distant throb of old scars. He reached down, picked up his paper bag, and brushed the dust from it. Inside was nothing but a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a folded American flag, creased from years of careful keeping. Harold looked down at the flag for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Still at it, huh?" he murmured, half smiling. The streetlight buzzed once more, then steadied. He turned, shoulders straight again, and began the slow walk home. The limp had returned, but there was something almost deliberate about it, like he was choosing to carry the weight, not bow to it. Behind him, the night closed back in, swallowing the echoes of what had just happened. To anyone else, it would have seemed like nothing, just an old man on a quiet street. But for Harold Tate, the battle had never really ended. It had only changed its shape. The street was silent after they ran, that strange, hollow quiet that comes only after violence. Harold stood still for a long moment, watching the direction they'd disappeared. The adrenaline bled slowly from his veins, leaving behind that familiar chill, the one that always came after a fight. The city sounds began creeping back. A dog barking, a car stereo thumping somewhere in the distance, the rustle of a newspaper in the gutter. The world moved on, as it always did, and Harold was once again just an old man standing alone under a flickering streetlight. He bent down with a soft grunt, picked up his paper bag, and peeked inside to make sure nothing was broken. The loaf of bread was slightly crushed, but the milk was fine. Beneath it, the folded flag lay untouched, the corners sharp and precise. Harold brushed a bit of dust from the edge of the paper bag and smiled faintly. "Still, with me," he murmured. His fingers lingered on the flag. It had belonged to his best friend, Leroy Jackson, the man who'd pulled him out of the mud when shrapnel tore into his leg back in '69. Leroy hadn't made it home. Harold had promised to deliver the flag to his mother, but she'd passed before he could. After that, the flag became a kind of compass, a quiet reminder of what still mattered. He straightened, the ache in his leg flaring up again now that the heat of combat had drained away. The limp was back, deeper this time. His body reminded him that no amount of training could cheat time. Still, his stride was steady as he made his way down the street, one slow step after another. The corner store owner, Mr. Patel, had watched part of the scuffle through the window. When Harold passed by, he pushed open the door, the bell jingling softly. "Mr. Tate," he said nervously, "you okay, sir?" "Those boys." Harold waved him off gently. "Just kids. Lost ones." Mr. Patel frowned. "They're trouble. You should call the police." Harold smiled, faint and tired. The police got bigger problems than three fools with no aim. He gave a small nod and kept walking. Mr. Patel watched him go, shaking his head, muttering something about angels and soldiers. The night air grew cooler as Harold turned onto his block. Streetlights cast long shadows over the cracked sidewalk. He passed the empty playground, swings creaking in the wind, an echo of laughter that had long since faded. For a second, his mind slipped back decades. He saw the faces of his unit, young, loud, grinning under their helmets, playing cards by firelight before the next patrol. Then the memory shifted. The explosions, the chaos, the screaming. He blinked, and the vision dissolved back into the quiet city night. He reached his building, a squat structure that had survived more winters than it should have. The front door stuck like always, and he had to shoulder it open. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of old paint and laundry soap. He climbed the stairs slowly, the wood creaking under his boots. His apartment was small but clean. Everything had its place. Boots by the door, medals in a box by the window, photos neatly arranged on a shelf. He set the paper bag on the kitchen counter and poured himself a glass of water. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. Not from fear, that was long gone, but from age, the slow wearing down of years spent fighting, even after the war ended. He walked to the window and looked out over the street below. It was quiet again, the kind of peace he'd stopped expecting a long time ago. Somewhere, a siren wailed faintly, then faded away. On the table near the window sat an old photo frame. Inside was a picture of a young Harold standing beside his squad, all smiles and bravado, shirts off in the blistering sun. Leroy was there too, tall and proud, his hand resting on Harold's shoulder. "We made it," he'd said that day, right before everything fell apart. Harold set down the glass and picked up the photo. The edges were worn, but the faces were still clear. "Still fighting, huh, old friend?" he whispered. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, quick, nervous steps. Harold peered out the window and saw the same 3 boys from earlier, now walking on the far side of the street. They weren't laughing anymore. One of them had a bandaged wrist, another kept glancing over his shoulder. When they passed under the streetlight, the tall one looked up, just for a second, and met Harold's gaze. His face shifted from fear to something almost like respect. Then he looked away, and the 3 disappeared into the darkness. Harold watched until they were gone. Then he gave a slow, weary nod. Maybe the lesson would stick. Maybe it wouldn't. Either way, he'd done what he could. He sat down in his worn armchair, the springs creaking beneath him, and leaned back. The city hummed quietly outside, a lullaby of engines, footsteps, and faraway voices. He closed his eyes, feeling the heaviness in his bones settle. For a moment, he was back in the jungle, not the fear or the blood, but the peace that came afterward. The silence when the gunfire stopped, when all you could hear was the breath in your chest and the heartbeat reminding you that you were still here. Harold smiled to himself. "Still here," he whispered. The words were half prayer, half promise. The night rolled on outside, and the old veteran drifted into sleep, the city lights painting faint gold across the folded flag on his table, a quiet symbol of a man who'd fought his wars, seen his ghosts, and somehow kept walking forward.